TV.
We'd like to start by recognizing Newfoundland and Labrador as the ancestral homelands of many Indigenous people and acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit.
Rick asked me, he said, do you have a bio of me up there? I said, yeah. He said, you just, don't do that. But I will say a couple of things. So a bunch of years ago, my late husband, Paul Pope, worked with Rick a bunch of times on a bunch of projects right back from Secret Nation, a feature film that he produced with Mike Jones many, many years ago that Mike directed, where Rick played Kathy Jones' little brother, an eccentric performance artist who had come back from New York to live in his parents' basement. Right to... More recently, they would do New Year's Eve, CBC's New Year's Eve. So, and many projects in between. And a bunch of years ago, myself and Louise Moyes, we used to do Art Smarts in schools. And we were on Galtus. And Paul and Louise's husband, Mark, would come along for the ride for a bit of fun and cook for us, which was very sweet. So we were at the school in Galtus. And we arrived like 8:45 in the morning, and the kids were doing, as an exercise, they were doing Rant Like Rick. And Paul said, I knows Rick, he's a friend of mine. And so he goes to the principal. He says, I think I can get Rick on the phone. So he phones up Rick at 9 o'clock in the morning, which is like, 7:30 his time, and says, Rick, I'm at the school and they're doing Rant Like Rick. Would you talk to him? And Rick's like, I suppose, boy. Give me a few minutes to wake up. So we put him on speakerphone. This was a while ago. I mean, I guess there was Zoom on the go, but there wasn't. No, this was pre-COVID, so there was no Zoom. So we put him on speakerphone with the entire class in the teacher's room, and Rick fully committed to 45 minutes of telling those kids how to rant like Rick. And they were so thrilled. And he did it like it wasn't 7:30 in the morning and as if it was something he did every day, which I'm sure he does. Then my husband Paul passed away a couple of years ago. And I ran into Rick, and he said, he's saying nice things about Paul, and he said, I still have Paul's stapler from when they did New Year's Eve at his house, at his Bay house. And I said, okay, get it back to me at some point. And then when the board got together last year and we were programming, and they said, well, Rick's got a new book out. Do you think we can get Rick Mercer? And I said, see what I can do. So I call up Rick and I say, so Rick, would you do the festival and you can keep the damn stapler? And he said, yes. So thank you, Rick, for coming to join us. And I won't say your bio. So come on up.
Thank you, Lisa, for that kind introduction, that lovely story. It's so great to be here. I didn't know you were going to mention the stapler. It's great to be here. It's so great. Thank you also, Rebecca and Lisa, for inviting me here. I couldn't believe when I walked in here today. I had driven by this place before, but I never stepped foot inside the place before. And I felt terrible when I came in and I saw how beautiful it was that I hadn't set foot in the place before, because both Lisa and Paul over the years had been suggesting, if you're ever, driving by, pop in. And I never did, which of course kills me because, best laid plans go astray and then suddenly someone's not around anymore to pop in and have a visit with them. And Paul was really incredible as an individual, but as a facilitator for young people, my generation, anyone who went into show business. Paul was so instrumental in making that happen. And Lisa mentioned the last time we worked together was New Year's Eve. So it was called Countdown to 2022. And I'd been doing these on the CBC for a while, and they were always out of, once we did it in Mallard Cottage, but generally they were out of Ontario. And this one was supposed to be out of, I can't remember, like Wayne Gretzky's vineyard or something. And COVID raised its ugly head again, and suddenly things were shutting down. And we decided it just didn't make sense to try to pull this live show off. And then Gerald, my partner, got on the phone to the CBC in Toronto and Insight Productions, the people doing the show. And he said, we're just going to have to do it in Newfoundland. And they said, well, where? Like, we're 3 days out. And he said, we'll do it in Rick's shed. And they said, how the hell are we going to do that? And he said, that would be a question for Paul Pope. So Paul liked a challenge, and he came and we pulled this show off. And it was so exciting because it was like the old days. There just wasn't a very big crew. I mean, the shed is only 12 by 15. So it was like the old days. And, Don Ellis was there on boom like the old days. And me and Paul, before we started, were putting up lights, like Christmas lights, with the stapler to make it look seasonal in my shed. And I remember laying the stapler next to a can of paint, and honestly, it was not my fault, it was his, because I said, don't forget your stapler. Anyway, the show was a great success. I thought it was so authentic to becoming live from a shed. I don't know if the people in Ontario ever really got what it was going on. But anyway, I really loved it. And then the next time I saw Paul was the next year when it was the Come Home year in Newfoundland, of course, you all remember. And the Premier, Fury, put this committee together of stakeholders. So people from tourism, people from transportation, people from the arts, people from show business. Anyway, for some reason I was there and Brad Gouju was on it. I mean, it was weird. Anyway, Paul was on it, and there was this big Zoom call, and Paul had a lot to say about logistics, which was his thing, and he was, very well spoken, of course. He had a lot to say. It was a very good meeting. It was all very polite. And then as the meeting was shutting down, I was about to close my laptop. I hear Paul, and he goes, Rick, are you in Chapels? And I was like, yes, I'm in Chapels. And he said, when are you coming to town? And I said, in a couple of days, I think. And he said, don't forget my fucking stapler. And then someone said, what does that mean? And then the Premier popped up on the screen. And he said, I believe it means Rick should return Paul's stapler. Anyways, so I'm sorry I never popped in and visited them, and I'm sorry, I can't believe I've never been at this event before because I love books. I love everything about books. I'm fortunate in my life I've written 5 books, although I should say written 5 books because my first 3 books were a collection of things that were never meant to be read. They were rants from the TV show, and I would just put them out as books, and I felt like I was a bit of an imposter walking around with a book under my arm. And in fact, the Globe and Mail reviewed one of those books, and back when books got reviewed in this country, and the guy said, Rick Mercer didn't so much as write a book as hit select all and print. Which, is pretty legitimate because it's literally what I did. But anyways, but then when my show ended, I had all these, highfalutin ideas what I was going to do, and then COVID happened, and so I was lucky. I was one of the luckiest people in the world. I had a cabin in Newfoundland with a beautiful view of the ocean, and I got to ride it out there, but all my plans, like your plans, went out the window, and I was staring at the ocean going, how lucky am I? and that I'm not in a little box in the sky in Toronto, and then of course being a man of a certain age, staring at the ocean, I was bored shitless after 5 minutes. I mean, I know it's nice and everything, but you can't stare at it all day. And so I decided to write a book, and my editor said, write a memoir. And I said, I think I'm too young to write a memoir. And he said, Alan Doyle's written 3. Same age, okay. So the first memoir I wrote was called Talking to Canadians, and I suggest that everyone write a memoir. Whether you think your audience is 1 person, 5 people, or 50,000 people, it forces you to reflect, and I'm not a very reflective person, but it forced me to think about and then write about what became a love story to growing up in Middle Cove and the arts community in St. John's and the LSPU Hall and NIFCO. And I got to write a chapter about Lois Brown, who was so instrumental in my career and my life, and then so many others as well. And Benny Malone, who's here, is also in the book. I mean, I was like a completely lost 17-year-old, and Benny Malone actually allowed me to run away and join the circus. I drove his station wagon across the island. Like, you have to be 21 to drive someone else's car. But anyway, he allowed me to drive the station wagon for Wonderbolt Circus around the province, and anyway, that was a love story to Newfoundland. My second book, which I'm going to read from now, is called The Road Years, and it was a love story to traveling the country, because it's the greatest gift that I've ever had in my life. 16 years, of literally traveling to 2 different places in the country every single week, talking to people from all different walks of life. It was an incredible gift. And so I'm going to read just a little bit from chapter 1, which sets up that show and the idea behind it. And then I'm going to just read 2 heavily redacted chapters, looking around this room, sizing you up, about 2 of your favorite people, Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau. I know. Who's your favorite today? So this is my love letter to the road. Chapter 1, Have Show Will Travel. What does it mean to be Canadian? Not only is that a wildly pretentious way to start a book, it is also a question that has beguiled us since day one. Canada has been called a lot of things. We've been called one of the world's greatest democracies. We've been called a shining beacon of hope for those fleeing tyranny. Readers of the Toronto Star will know us as an evil construct built on the shame that is colonialism. And of course, we've been called stunningly beautiful and a terrible place to winter. We are nothing if not self-deprecating. We pride ourselves on not taking ourselves too seriously. We are prone to bouts of jingoism. Prime Minister Jean Chrétien pounded every podium in the land and declared us as the greatest nation on earth. We are capable of deep insecurity. Before becoming Prime Minister, Chrétien's arch-rival, Stephen Harper, once stood at a podium in Washington, D.C. and said that Canada was, quote, a Northern European welfare state in the worst sense of the term. It's safe to say that when it comes to Canada, the reviews have been mixed. Me, I like the place. More than one should probably admit. But what does it mean to be from here or to have landed here? What does it mean to be Canadian? If you put 10 Canadians in a room and ask them what it means to be a Canadian, in 3 minutes they'll start talking about how we're not like Americans. This is a uniquely Canadian trait. Most nations do not define themselves about how they are different from some other country. Talking about how we aren't like Americans is a national pastime. 9 out of 10 loud, brash Canadians are quick to agree Americans are too loud and too brash. We stand on guard for thee, we stand on the world's largest pedestal. I never gave much thought to the question, what does it mean to be a Canadian, until I was in my teens, when the government of Brian Mulroney launched a royal commission that asked the very question. We were supposed to come up with the answer. I was flummoxed. I didn't know the answer, but how is it possible that nobody else in the country did either? My God, I thought, doesn't this country have a research department? But apparently in Canada, we are so clueless as to our own identity that the Prime Minister had to hire an academic by the name of Keith Spicer to go around the country and ask citizens to make presentations on what does it mean to be a Canadian. Now, for those of you with a passing memory of grade school history, our so-called founding fathers signed Canada into existence in 1867. The location, Prince Edward Island. A bloat of prosperous men from all over British North America came together and fortified with a ridiculous amount of liquor, they argued and drank until a country was born. It was not an immaculate conception, it was a very messy one. Modern day Canada prides itself on being a diverse nation, and the fathers of Confederation were no slouches in that department. There are many shades of white and a variety of English accents. Diversity was encouraged as long as everyone was Protestant. Rumors persist that a few Irish Catholics were in the mix, but if true, they kept their lifestyle on the down low. The man at the center of the founding bender, was Sir John A. Macdonald. He would go on to become Canada's first and drunkest Prime Minister. After he was sworn in for the first time, he was asked, what's the most he ever spent on a bottle of whiskey? His answer, 45 minutes. But legend has it that when Sir John, or John, as he was known to his friends, signed the country into existence, he eloquently defined what it meant to be a Canadian. Unfortunately, the next day, crippled from the sauce, nobody could remember what it was he said. The answer was lost to the ages. Personally, I blame this prime ministerial blackout for the fact that 150 years later, in 2004, nobody answered the question. But as luck would have it, it was around this time that I was given a chance to try. You see, it was this time that Gerald and I were given the keys to a glorious kingdom. And by glorious kingdom, I mean we landed an 8 o'clock time slot on the CBC. I promise that this will be the last time in this book that our public broadcaster will be called a glorious kingdom. But that's exactly how I felt when we were given this opportunity. I won't go into how important the CBC was in my formative years and in my career. Anyone who's curious about that scintillating part of Canadian history can read my previous memoir, Talking to Canadians. The Globe and Mail has called it a very affordable read. Gerald sold the show to the CBC by promising them everything and nothing. He promised them huge ratings and promised them gold, but wisely didn't comment to anything other than Rick will be on the road. I say this as if we had some grand plan. Gerald might have, but I honestly didn't know what we were going to do. I was terrified. Gerald was putting on a brave face, but Gerald has great faith in not only his abilities, but mine as well, whereas I suffered from imposter syndrome. Gerald had none. There was a lot to do, but first we had to go to the upfronts. Now, the upfronts are a series of events held by network television each fall, in which they parade their so-called stars and hype new programs in front of advertisers and the media. Typically, the CBC waves the flag and says, they are the Canadian network where you will find the Canadian stories. CTV, the dominant private network, does the same thing. They too declare they are the place to see Canadian stories. And then they bring out the stars of The Bionic Woman or America's Best Pimple Popper Canada. The American stars ingratiate themselves to the crowd by saying things like, wow, I've never been to Canada. You have great restaurants here. Give yourself a round of applause. We had a lot to celebrate that day. The schedule was released and we had Monday at 8. Monday at 8 was the original time slot for my previous show, This Hour's 22 Minutes. We felt that when the network moved 22 minutes, it was a huge mistake. To me, it was the perfect slot for any show that traded in current events, and I wanted that piece of real estate back. And once we had the time slot, we announced the title, Monday Report. We deduced that if we put the day of the week in the title, they could never move us ever. Monday would be ours forever. We opened on January 2004 with a contract for 12 episodes. And out of the gate, surprise, we were a hit. By the time we wrapped, we were the biggest show in the network. On the day we were renewed, we were also told that we were moving to Tuesdays. Monday Report would now be on Tuesday. Only on the CBC could such a thing happen. But Tuesday it was, and it worked out. It was our home for the next 14 years. For 255 episodes, I was on the road visiting every nook and cranny the country had to offer. Gerald always said, this show is about celebrating the country. As long as you do that, we'll run forever. And he was right. But from day one, I had a secret agenda. To celebrate, yes, but to answer what the Spicer Commission set out to do so many years earlier. Answer the bloody question, what does it mean to be Canadian? I knew the answer was on the road. It was there that all would be revealed. End of chapter 1. As our show evolved, I stopped talking to politicians, and I always talk to some famous people. I love to talk to, members of the Tragically Hip or whoever, but by and large, 90% of the people that I talked to on the show had never been on television, never would be on television ever again, and I felt that if I had any skill, it was to make them look like rock stars. But occasionally I did talk to people that, were quote-unquote famous, and I will share 2 of those events now. This is, again, redacted. Politics is not an occupation for the normal person, and becoming the leader of a major political party is not something that can happen to you by accident. It takes hard work and mad skills. The exception being Justin Trudeau, who only had to remain upright. His becoming prime minister was predetermined the moment he was born on Christmas Day, 1971. In many ways, Trudeau is like the Harry Potter of Canada's naturally governing party. Powerful forces inside the liberal Laurentian elite, forces we muggles could never understand, used magic in Quebec to give him the keys to the prime minister's office. No amount of blackface or condensation could stop that from happening. But when the Mercer Report started in 2004, Justin Trudeau was not a political figure of any note. He was a private citizen, wandering around, dropping hints that he might just have to run the country someday. My most telling interaction with Justin occurred in a bush. It was a beautiful July night, and I was in the backyard of a house in Rosedale, one of Toronto's toniest neighborhoods. I was not alone. The event was called Bare Naked in Rosedale. It was a fundraiser featuring, as you may have guessed, the Bare Naked Ladies. I'd been to a few fundraisers in my life, but nothing this exclusive. Walking through the backyard where the event was being held was completely surreal. I had no idea why I was invited, but I was thrilled to be there. It was for a good cause, of course, but I remember having no idea what the actual cause was. The backyard pool held some clues. Inflatable life buoys were bobbing around in the water. Each one of them had a stick with a sign attached. Each sign bore a single word: diversity, strength, community, teamwork, empowerment, hope. It was no surprise that the guest speaker was celebrated private citizen Justin Trudeau. And to his credit, Trudeau was a celebrity. Among the private citizens, the civilians with all the money, the ones who were expected to bid vast amounts on the silent wine auction, he was the one they wanted to meet. When he entered the garden, fashionably late, the gold medalist, the recording artist, the Grammy and the Juno Award winner, the best-selling authors, and certainly the TV monkeys paled in comparison. He moved through the room as if he owned the place, and we were his invited guests. And people were far more eager to shake his hand than anyone else's. It was a smorgasbord of selfies and infatuated ladies. It was a great night. The Bare Naked Ladies were incredible. And they were joined by Randy Bachman, the Philosopher Kings, Leslie Feist. It was an astounding lineup. The master of ceremonies for the evening was Canada AM host Seamus O'Regan. And he introduced his dear friend, Justin Trudeau, to great applause. They hugged on stage, and Seamus whispered into his ear, "These early mornings are killing me. I have to be in makeup in 4 hours. When can I be a cabinet minister?" "Have patience," Trudeau responded. And then, switching sides to hug it out, he added, "I'll be spending the winter at Whistler. I'll think about it then." "Yes, Sensei," Seamus responded. And then they bowed towards one another as if one of them was the Dalai Lama and the other was a morning show host. In that room, the gesture did not seem out of place. It was a good speech. Trudeau did a fine job of congratulating us for coming. He praised the organizers for their hard work, the owners of their home for the use of their garden, and he mentioned that he was dedicating his life to Canada. This was a bombshell. "I will be dedicating my life to Canada." He also managed to say every single word that was floating in the swimming pool 12 times. And there was a buzz about him, not only because of his celebrity by birth status, but the political lay of the land had changed dramatically. Paul Martin had just lost a general election that was decidedly not supposed to happen. Stephen Harper's Conservatives had just formed a minority government. The Liberal Party was, for all intents and purposes, rudderless. People were looking for a silver bullet. And in a party tired of war horses, Justin Trudeau was shiny and new. Trudeau was certainly enjoying the speculation around his future. All eyes were on him. Much later that night, after a second encore from the Bare Naked Ladies, and for me, far too many glass of bubbles, I was returning from a visit to the world's nicest porta potty. It had hardwood floors. When I heard psst coming from behind a tree, and I looked and I saw Justin Trudeau hiding behind some bushes. He waved me over, indicating that he wanted me to join him. He lifted a branch to reveal a tiny private clearing inside. I know of only 2 reasons why a man might ask another man to join him in the bushes. Hopefully this was neither of those. I discreetly wandered over and joined him in the brambles. Turns out he was simply taking a break from selfies and wanted to make small talk. "How's the TV show doing?" he asked. "How are you?" And then he gazed directly into my eyes and asked, "Are you happy?" This is exactly the kind of thing I have no capacity for. Wow, am I happy? Wow, that's a loaded question. I thought you called me in here to ask you to join you in serving Canada. A not-so-clever crack acknowledging all the attention he was getting when he announced he was devoting his life to Canada. And suddenly he turned even more serious. He continued to look me directly in the eye, even more intensely. It was very unnerving. Then he placed his hand on my shoulder and squeezed it in a paternal manner and said, "No. When the time comes, if I ever have to ask you to step up and serve Canada, I will be calling you from my secret phone in Ottawa." So it turns out there's a third reason a man might invite another man into the bushes. For an awkward encounter in which he reveals he is so completely delusional, he believes he is destined to be Prime Minister. But all the time I thought was, wow, he's nuts. And apparently he has a bat phone. Of course, I was the delusional one. A few years later, he became Prime Minister, and during his tenure in Ottawa, that call from the secret phone never came. I meant to take up my phone and look at the clock. I can do one more, or do one more? Okay. And then I'll get away. This is your second favorite person. Stephen Harper is the singularly most impressive politician I have seen in my lifetime. Not because of what he did or did not accomplish during his years in office. The impressive part is that he made it to office at all. To be successful in politics, you need certain basic skills, the most important being the ability to talk to people. Also, it helps a heap if you like people. A politician's journey begins on the doorstep. The ability to knock on a stranger's door and engage them in a pleasant conversation is paramount. And this is not a one-time exercise. You must be able to do this over and over again, day after day, week after week. If either of you, any of you, ever find yourself seated next to a member of Parliament on the plane, chances are you will have a very pleasant conversation. You will come away having enjoyed the company. Most MPs have this down to a science. They can feign interest in anybody, anytime, on any subject. It's what they do. It's their superpower. And the people who are good at it, the very successful politicians, they actually enjoy it. The giants, the Jean Chrétiens, the Brian Mulroney, they like mixing it up. They are equally at ease in the lunchroom of a fish plant or the boardroom of a think tank. This does not describe Stephen Harper. The Stephen Harpers of the world are often successful, just not in politics. The fact that he made it to Parliament is amazing. That he became leader of a party is astounding. That he became Prime Minister is another word that begins with A. More than any other Canadian leader, Stephen Harper defied the odds on his way to the top. He's like the guy with no legs who conquered Everest. Sure, he proved you don't need legs to climb a mountain, but we all know it helps. Early in his tenure as Prime Minister, I had a chance to observe him outside of his natural habitat. And I have to say, his refusal to connect with people came very naturally to him. It was March 2008. It was about as far from the hallowed halls of Parliament Hill as you can get. Yellowknife, Northwest Territories. The event was the Arctic Winter Games. About as far away, the event was the Arctic Winter Games. 2,000 coaches, athletes, and artists from as far away as Russia, Alaska, Greenland, and across the Canadian North had arrived in the city for what promised to be the biggest games yet, which is exactly why the Mercer Report had landed in the sunny south of the circumpolar world. This was an event that was right up our alley. Mysterious northern sports and raw caribou awaited. We arrived at our hotel just hours before the opening of the games. We were dragging our gear into the lobby when the manager came up and said hello to me. He was incredibly polite. He said, "Mr. Mercer, welcome to the hotel. If you need anything, please feel free to call." I was blathering on about how excited I was to be there when he said, "If you have a moment, could I introduce you to some of our staff?" I looked over and there was a literal lineup of staff, perhaps 5 of them, dressed to the nines in various uniforms. He brought me over and introduced me to each one of them. The group was made up of representatives from the various departments in the hotel, the cleaning staff, the kitchen staff, etc. They were all lovely. After I inspected the troops, I told the manager I was a little taken aback. I said, "In all my years on the road, I have never had a welcome like that." He then confessed that the Prime Minister was scheduled to arrive any minute, and this welcoming party was for him. And that when he saw me come through the front door, he thought, well, I could be part of a dress rehearsal. I was the big guy stand-in. And at that moment, as if they were awaiting our cue, the doors to the hotel opened, RCMP officers flowed in. A minute later, a motorcade pulled up to the front of the hotel. A black SUV came to a stop. The rear door opened and out popped the Prime Minister of Canada. Harper, with an aide at his side, entered the hotel, deep in conversation. Together, he and the aide marched across the room towards an open elevator. They stepped in, they disappeared. The entire exercise took less than a minute. He met nobody. He made eye contact with nobody. The welcoming line awkwardly dispersed. This is the dichotomy of Stephen Harper as Prime Minister. Jean Chrétien or Brian Mulroney would not only have taken the time to charm everyone in the line, they would have done a once around the lobby, then popped into the kitchen to say hello. Stephen Harper would have found that painful. It was not why he was there. Later that evening, we shot the opening ceremonies of the games. The Prime Minister was front and center. He welcomed the athletes, declared the games open. In return, he was given an over-the-top rock star welcome. It's not every day a Prime Minister travels to the north. Once that was over, we went to the hotel for a bite to eat. We went to a small restaurant, but it was closed. We were about to walk away when a member of the Prime Minister's staff told us and said we could eat inside. The RCMP had closed the room for security reasons. The Prime Minister would be having dinner, and they were not allowing civilians into the room. But being regulars on the Hill and having been on the campaign plane, we were, as they say, known to police. We had security clearance, so we were welcome to stay. It was an education to watch Stephen Harper and his team have a quiet dinner in an empty restaurant in the north. For starters, that's who was at the table, Harper and his people, no one else. It was very low key. I couldn't help but wonder where the Premier was. Where was the local mayor? Where was the MP? Harper was all about work, not about ingratiating himself to locals or the local riding association. Also, telling was his interaction with the waitress. I watched him place his order. He was polite and courteous. He asked a couple of questions about the food, but that was it. There was no small talk. I don't think it occurred to him that seeing as he was the Prime Minister of Canada, he might want to ask her how her day was going or whether she was originally from Yellowknife. Even a comment on the weather might have gone a long way. Does he not realize, I thought, that this is a big moment for that waitress? So much so that she might be telling this story for the rest of her life? Did I ever tell you I once had a conversation with the Prime Minister of Canada? Really, people would say. What did he say? He said, I'll have the soup. Anyway, a few months later, in a moment of clarity, Team Harper decided to engage in a charm offensive. Nobody was more surprised than me because they decided to do it on RMR. We shot with Prime Minister Chrétien, Paul Martin twice at 24 Sussex. It made sense that when Harper was elected, we put in the same request. In fact, we put in the request more than once. The response was always the same, no thank you. The third time was lucky. I thought the ask was clever. We would go to Sussex Drive, we would have a straightforward interview, but the gag would be the Prime Minister would be outrageously pleasant to me and kill me with kindness. He would lavish me with hospitality. I didn't need to explain why this was amusing. Not a person in the country could picture Stephen Harper being nice to any media, let alone me. When they said yes, why they said yes, I have no idea. But they didn't have to say yes twice, so we headed to Ottawa. We wondered if this was an indication and a change in the Prime Minister's office. Were they now comfortable enough in their position to entertain the notion that maybe everyone was out to get them? The answer was no. It was early in the morning when we pulled through the gates of 24 Sussex Drive. The house had a distinctly different vibe now that the Harpers were in residence, inside and out. Approaching the building, it was clear that there was a family with children living there now. There was a basketball net in the driveway, kids' bikes by the front door. Harper always had a team of young, dedicated staffers with him. This was not new. Prime ministers and cabinet ministers have always attracted staff that will look to them as if they were a combination of Winston Churchill and Albert Einstein. But Harper's staff took this to a whole new level. Harper wasn't surrounded by eager young idealists so much as child soldiers who had pledged fidelity to a jungle lord. They were aggressive with us out of the gate. There were many questions. What exactly are you doing? What words are you going to be saying? When can I see a script? The answer is being, I don't know, and there isn't one. This didn't worry me. I mean, the Prime Minister had agreed to the shoot. That's all that mattered. And as far as giving them a script, well, I may not be Lyndon McIntyre, but I had some standards. I'd die before I did that. The vibe from these staffers right out of the gate was that of barely camouflaged hostility. I knew what was going on. Politicians, for the most part, have thick skins. The same is true of the senior staffers and the chiefs of staff. But the young ones, the junior staffers, on the other hand, are very quick to take offense. If anything critical is said about their boss, they become personally wounded. The expression in Newfoundland is quick to hurt. If your boss is the Prime Minister of a functioning democracy with a free press, they are in a constant state of distress. Easily triggered are the little ones. I didn't know these people. I hadn't seen them on any of the campaign planes or buses I'd be on. But that said, they were standing in the Prime Minister's house, so they couldn't be ignored. My guess is they were well raised by mothers and fathers with impeccable connections to the Conservative Party. But if their job was to welcome us and give us a hand, they missed the memo. Instead, unfortunately, none of the contacts I had at the PMO were there. At the time, there were, at all times, 3 omnipresent figures around the Prime Minister: Dimitri Soudis, Cory Tenecki, and Ray Novak. All 3 were loyal to Harper, Ray in particular. Ray had gone to work as a child intern at the National Citizens Coalition when Harper was president. The NCC is a right-wing think tank, and it was there, over a mutual distaste for the social safety net, their platonic love developed. They became inseparable, like Barney to his Fred. Ray was never far from Harper's side. He followed him everywhere, including when Harper changed jobs. When Harper became leader of the opposition, Ray moved into Stornoway, the official residence, and slept in a room above the garage. He was available 24/7, ready to dispense strategic advice, warm milk in a binky cup. Not only would Ray stay with Harper during his tenure as Prime Minister, rising to the position of Chief of Staff, he would follow Harper into public life. He is currently one of 2 associates at the private consulting firm Harper and Associates. As a practicing Viking, Ray has made it clear that when the time comes, he wishes to be buried with the former Prime Minister in Harper's tomb. But sadly, on this day at 24, neither Ray or any of the other wise men were on hand. Instead, we had this welcoming committee of suspicious and nervous staffers. And from the minute our gear was brought into the house, they began to second-guess each of our setups. Our understanding was we had access to the entire downstairs of the residence. The staffers didn't like this. The first thing we did was place 2 chairs in the middle of the room. One of them stepped forward. Actually, you can't move any furniture. John gently explained that if we needed to move the chairs together in a classic interview setup, if we were going to have an interview. Another one of them said, "Do you really need light stands?" I politely informed them, yes, if we were shooting in the living room, we would need lights. Luckily, Ray showed up before a mini war broke up. He arrived with the Prime Minister, who seemed to be in a good mood. The Prime Minister went upstairs, leaving John, Ray, and me to walk through the shoot. Once Ray was on the scene, everything changed. The staff who were moments ago in our faces about everything were now standing against a far wall, silent. They were like pets. They were not allowed on the furniture. Ray could not have been more open. Every gag I suggested, he said yes to. In many ways, they were 2 versions of the same person. He even readily agreed when I said I want to take all the cushions off every couch and build a fort in the living room. Ray got it. Don't move any chairs, pursed his lips like a nun being admonished by the Mother Superior. We were on a roll. We were given the run of the place. But then we hit a roadblock. I told Ray, I want to get a shot of me and Harper at the piano. We would then cut to the 2 of us doing a duet of chopsticks. And then we would cut to the Prime Minister playing something classical, something in the public domain that I won't have to pay for. Ray said, no, that won't work. I said, but there's a piano right there. Comes with the house, Ray said. Rachel plays a bit. But the Prime Minister can play piano, I said. I don't know where you got that idea. I started to make a suggestion. Well, maybe if we just sat at the piano, and he said, there will be no piano in this shoot. You will not show the piano. I know a third rail when I see one, but this didn't make any sense. I wasn't suggesting he appear in blackface. An obvious career ender. I was suggesting he play music box dancer while I looked at him with a goofy smile. Regardless, you pick your battles. A few minutes later, the Prime Minister arrived and we walked him through the premise. Started out as a straight-up interview shot in the living room. We covered Harper's time in office, and then I moved on to something that was being talked about on every newscast, but which the Prime Minister had not yet commented, his government's signature piece of environmental legislation. So the Clean Air Act, I said, are we really supposed to be impressed? You want to lower carbon emissions by the year 2050? At which point something completely unexpected happened. The staffer at the back of the room, up until this point, had been completely silent, so much I'd forgotten that they were there. The little darlings had their backsides so tight against the wall that if they got any closer, their bums would have been embedded in asbestos. As soon as I mentioned the 2050 target date in the Clean Air Act, one of them became alive. It was like he was hit by a bolt of lightning. "No!" he shouted. Both the PM and I looked up. I was completely startled. Harper was as surprised as I was. The staffer stammered, "This is not supposed to be a real interview. There's not supposed to be talk of the Clean Air Act. Nobody said there would be talks about the Clean Air Act." This was followed by an awkward silence. Had his inside voice got confused with his outside voice? This was a stunning thing for a staffer to do. Harper smiled and said to the young man, "Oh, it's okay. I'm more than happy to answer any questions on the Clean Air Act or anything else." I have no idea how long that poor young man ended up hanging from his ankles in the punishment room. But I never saw him again during the Prime Minister's tenure. After a chat about the Clean Air Act, we moved on to some gags. First one involved the Prime Minister feeding me. We set up in the kitchen so he could make a sandwich. We were setting up and one of his support team began to brief the Prime Minister on how to make a sandwich. It was a surreal moment. This young man was saying, "All you have to do, Prime Minister, is take 2 slices of bread, put butter on one, put it on the cutting board, lay some ham on it, then get some cheese." Harper interrupted, "I can make a sandwich, I'll be fine." I couldn't tell if we got him on his best day ever or if his medications had been miraculously balanced. But for a man who didn't suffer fools at all, he took being talked to like a dimwit about a sandwich remarkably well. From a straight-up comedic point of view, the piece was good. It moved along at a nice clip. It certainly was unexpected to see Harper have fun, let alone at his own expense. And there were jokes. Conservatives loved it. Must have been a very odd feeling for them to watch their leader appear human on the CBC. They must have felt like they had slipped into a parallel universe. There was also mild rage from liberals who felt that I had betrayed them and their cause by allowing Stephen Harper to be funny. I told them I tried my best to make Liberal leader Stéphane Dion appear funny many times, but it couldn't be done. After all, it's a microphone I wield, not a magic wand. Terry Mosher, the celebrated editorial cartoonist for the Montreal Gazette, marked the occasion by portraying me as a sellout who would work for anyone. What an honor to be eviscerated in a Mosher cartoon. But I admit I've always been conflicted about the piece. And for the longest time, I was baffled why they circled the wagons around the piano. Because while I didn't know much about Stephen Harper, I did know he played the piano. The previous year, I received a random call from someone who said a friend of his was in St. John's on business and needed some information about the town. In particular, he wanted to know if there was a place where one could buy sheet music downtown. Like all Newfoundlanders, when called on to provide local intel, I was happy to report that on Water Street, there's a store called O'Brien's Music. O'Brien's is legendary, I said. It's been there forever. It was founded in like 1939. The guy who scored Star Wars used to shop there in the 50s when he was stationed at the U.S. military base. He cut me off before I could tell him, it's the place to go to buy an accordion or a glockenspiel. My friend needs sheet music, he said. He travels with Stephen Harper. When there's a piano, Harper likes to play Beatles music to relax. Man plays piano to relax struck me as an entirely benign and not very interesting fact. Little did I know I was now in possession of a closely guarded secret. Turns out, when Stephen Harper first made a run for the leadership of the Canadian Alliance Party, his people analyzed every positive and negative about the man. Some of the positives were obvious. He loves hockey. My God, he's halfway there. But some negatives were serious liabilities. One of those, they determined, was that he played the piano. According to these people around Harper, the piano was an elite instrument. It was only played by the rich, and it was mostly played by women. And classical music on the piano was completely out as a hobby. This was not acceptable. As a result, if Harper was ever to talk about hobbies or interests, he could focus exclusively on hockey. He could say he liked listening to music, but he could never admit that he played music. As far as they were concerned, if he copped to playing Chopin in the evenings, or if he was ever seen tickling the ivories in a hotel lobby, he may as well announce he had spent his 20s moonlighting as a gay liberal arts professor. The irony is, because of these societal views on the piano, Stephen Harper was, for most of his public life, deep in the closet. 3 years would pass before Harper came out of the closet. He shocked the country by walking on stage at the National Arts Center during a gala performance by Yo-Yo Ma. It was an unexpected move. Harper famously avoided cultural events. On this occasion, Harper not only appeared, but he crossed the stage, sat on the piano, and played a duet with a living legend. Of course, the place went mad. He received a standing ovation. It's amazing what a tolerant country we are. How is this possible, people wondered. How was it that so many profiles have been written about this man and no one mentioned he played the piano? If anything, it made him appear smarter or more interesting. I would like to report it was a great day for Canadian culture, but it did not turn out to be that. His relationship with the arts would remain hostile. But it was a great day for Stephen Harper the man, because on that day he made the difficult and personal decision to come out and reveal his true self. And those people who loved him, his base, accepted him for who he was. A piano-playing elitist. The base decided to hate the sin, but not the sinner. He survived the Yo-Yo Ma duet. And the love that dare not speak its name was never mentioned again. Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm just going to leave this right here.
I didn't tell him I
was going to tell the stapler story. So I guess he knew it was time. So thank you, Paul Pope. Thank you, Rick Mercer, for staplers and for stories. And thank you for an extraordinary number of readers tonight. Sorry, a little emotional. Thanks, Rick.
It was one of those amazing nights when everything seemed to go just right. This is it, this is life. Sit back, enjoy it. You always think you're not there yet. You're standing in some thicker dream you can't forget. Do you get it? This is it. It's catch-22 and then too many more come. You're walking around in darkness like you just begun. All you can say is here we go again. Was amazing enough for me, not enough for you to even talk about. It's like half your shirt's tucked in, half's hanging out. Wondering if you're in this or not. It's not my favorite pastime, it makes me cry. Do you get it? This is my life. What seems okay to you is not okay to me. This road has no exit onto Jubilee. I don't know why I don't turn myself around. I don't know why I don't turn myself around. I don't know why I don't turn myself around. Thank you.
You're watching an interesting local show on Rogers TV and you want to know more. That's when you head to rogerstv.com. Our website provides more information about our programs, our hosts, our schedule, and about how you too can get involved with Rogers TV. Visit us online at rogerstv.com.
We want to hear from you. Provide feedback on this show or find out how you can get involved. Call, email us, or scan the QR code to take our quick survey.
This is a man's heart, a heart in desperate need of medical attention. But because 78% of Indigenous people experience racism in healthcare, he may not get the help he needs. Become an ally. Rise above racism in healthcare.
Are you low on food? Struggling to pay the bills? Overwhelmed by life's challenges? When you need support but don't know where to turn, just dial 211. 211 connects you to the programs or services near you.
211, how can I help you?
211. Help starts here.
When I was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, I was deteriorating